Welcome again to the KAPcast, and what we try and do here is point out some big issues and those sort of things that we think can take Queensland forward, and discuss those topics that I think are important for government to look at. And we're very privileged today. Mining is sort of one of those things where is synonymous with Queensland and development of Queensland, and the KAP, we're not as interested in developing an economy through the Olympics or putting on big parties. We think that mining and some of those primary industries need some focus. So with that, we thought we'd talk to someone that knows mining as well as anyone. And I'm here joined today with John Lorraine from Core Resources, and it's Neuchâtel Partners, is how I pronounce that, John, is it?
Pretty close, Neuchâtel.
And just tell us quickly, John, you were saying earlier before you've had a bit of a look at, you've got an understanding of how big we are in Queensland, and on the recent trip that you took.
I was very lucky, Robbie, to sail a classic racing boat in the last month from Gold Coast to Bali. So we had 8 days at sea up to Thursday Island, 3 days in Thursday Island, trying to get our COVID tests, and then 9 days from Thursday Island to Bali.
That sounds just like what I want to do at your age, mate.
Yeah. Look, I've never done anything like it before. The opportunity came up, so I thought I'd have a crack.
Some beautiful water up there too, I imagine.
There is, yeah. Absolutely awesome. Well, we realise how many islands are off the coast of Queensland. You don't often see them on the maps, but from Fraser Island all the way up to the top, it's islands all the way. Quite amazing.
So, John, I should have, we should have spoken before, but you really captured my attention at a forum the other day. As someone that's like a student of politics and really a student of industry in Queensland, and really want to get my head around how we manage these resources and what sort of resources we have. And it's often made, the comment's often made to me that, is mining dying out, is Mount Isa mines dying, that therefore mining's dying out in the Northwest Mineral Province. And you made a statement that was quite profound at that forum that made me think, this guy really knows what he's talking about. And when I've looked at your resume, I can see why you were talking with so much confidence. But just to start off with, you started out in South Africa.
I did. So I was brought up in Scotland, and I did something crazy when I was 18 and went to South Africa and got myself a job as a trainee miner on a gold mine. Yeah. I thought that was my gap year experience.
And that was Kimberley in South Africa.
Well, I was originally in what was then called the Orange Free State in Velcome on a gold mine.
Right.
As a trainee miner, and then actually not really planned, but then the company offered me a scholarship to study mining, and De Beers paid the scholarship.
And how'd you end up in Australia then?
And then actually, I was back in the UK. And I met a guy who is famous in the mining world called Robert Champion de Crepney, who had started a mining group called Normandy.
I remember the name well.
Yeah, and Robert is an incredibly charismatic person, and he invited me out to Australia, and we had a couple of days chatting in Adelaide, and the next thing I knew, we were moving out and living here.
John, I actually worked with Robert Champion de Crepney. In 1994-95, I worked as a storeman at the Mount Isa gold mine, which was owned by Normandy Poseidon.
Yeah. Well, I worked for the company then. Yeah, Bruce Price was the manager back then.
Yeah, Bruce Price was, and I always joked to my parents at the time that, and I was the lowest of the low at the mine. I later found out I was on the lowest wage on the entire mine site as a storeman, And I used to always joke to my parents that, I worked for Robert Champion de Crepney indirectly. I think it was such an impressive name that I never forgot it.
Well, at that stage, 94, we'd gone international as a company, and I was the first person to go overseas. I was working in Kuala Lumpur then, trying to set up our sort of, the things outside of Australia. And Bruce Price, manager at Mount Isa, always had his hand up. As soon as you find something up there in Southeast Asia, I'm coming up.
Yeah, right. And so you ended up at Mount Isa Mines.
So I came from Normandy.
Queensland Mining Company.
Yeah, exactly. I came from Normandy, and I joined MIM in 1996. And the company was having a crisis then, so there was problems on every front actually. So we did we had a bit of a battle straightening it all up at that stage, which resulted in lots of the projects that I talked about in the Northwest province.
And you were part of developing Ernest Henry and George Fisher mines, which are two big parts of MIM.
Look, that was an extraordinary era in the Mount Isa
Mm.
region because we had a very old-fashioned coal-fired power station at Mica Creek, um, and multiple mines were getting built at the same time. So we had Century, Ernest Henry, Cannington, Osborne, Phosphate Hill, all being built at the same time. And one of the issues was not enough power to drive them all. And so we did another huge thing then that brought the gas pipeline up to Mount Isa from Balera, 2,000 miles of gas pipeline, then converted Mica Creek to a gas-fired power station. So it was an awesome era then. The projects happening everywhere,
Yep.
which in a way is a message. That's what a mining boom looked like.
Isn't it?
There was
Yep.
billions of dollars getting spent, infrastructure being built.
Yep. Isn't that it's a beautiful thing to reflect on, I think, in terms of government and enabling industry and prosperity.
Yep.
We've, I think it'd be fair to say you'd be looking at 2,000 jobs perhaps in those projects that you've talked about.
At least, I mean, probably more. Certainly during that.
Well, that'd be direct jobs in the mine, yeah, and probably more. I was being conservative,
Yeah.
so I wouldn't be accused as exaggerating. But and that was from a government saying, here's a piece of, well, and perhaps driven by private industry, but at least the government help enable a piece of infrastructure that was built that's addressed energy, your core.
Yep.
One of your core expenses, and look what happened. Just things sprung up everywhere, and to me, from a government perspective, particularly the important thing to reflect on now is I find myself isolated in Parliament, pushing, not just talking, because a lot of politicians talk about things, but actually pushing for things in the Northwest Mineral Province. But there's sort of a reluctance and a lack of appreciation of how that plugs into the greater economy. And you say if we adopted 3,000 jobs developed in that time, well, you'd be lucky to get 30% or 20 or 30% of those jobs to be local in the region now, which means a great deal of that benefit, all that royalties goes into the state government's coffers, and all those wages go into Brisbane Townsville. And I mean that, I'm trying to say that as a positive message, in that we all benefit from these things.
Yeah.
It's not, if it's me pushing that in Parliament for things in the Northwest, it's not me doing it for Mount Isa or Cloncurry, it's me doing it for all of Queensland.
Sure.
And I think that's something that gets lost a little bit politically when we're pushing these infrastructure items to enable industry.
Yeah. Hey, look, if there was one big thing that could make a difference to the Queensland economy, it would be building 2 or 3 more, large scale sort of tier 1 mining projects. Yeah, I mean, they're, nowadays a project of the scale we were building back then, back then they were $300 or $400 million projects, let's say. They'd now be $1.5 to $2 billion projects. They can make a serious difference to the economy. And one of the things I believe in is that the Mount Isa region, is highly, highly prospective for more projects of that sort of scale.
Sure. And as I understand it, like the sort of the timeline you're talking about, because I've seen some spreadsheets before that sort of show the future of existing projects, provided they find no more reserves, and they could do some drilling and find more reserves and extend their mine life. But based on what they know now, it's can be a pretty depressing thing to contemplate, because I think it takes about 10 years, they say, from start to finish to get something operational.
Sad, so that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Look,
and if you just
again, it's also worth saying
now,
back in the early 90s, we were getting projects started from discovery to production in 5 years.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive. And actually,
Yes.
and that's while ticking all the boxes, so it wasn't shortcuts. So, and we could still do the same, and there's no reason for it not. So there's no reason for it not to be quicker if everyone's aiming in the right direction.
Right.
Now, you're dead right. In Northwest, there are a few things coming up that, have to. So the Mount Isa copper mines, as you realise, are, getting very much to the end of their life, and that copper smelter is being fed by, the remaining ore from Mount Isa, but also from, it's now having to buy ore from around the region.
Right.
It's really important that's kept operating because that's a huge piece of infrastructure,
Yeah.
and it's a big leg up for any future copper projects. So that's kind of a threat, to be dealt with to make sure that copper smelter remains intact. The lead zinc mines will go for 100 years. I mean, they're still giant ore bodies.
Yep. And that's still a what do you say? There's still a guaranteed offtake or at least a very reliable offtake for those mines for that product in the foreseeable future.
Oh, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, no real risks there.
So, John, tell me. We'll go back to that statement I made at the start. Was I heard you at a forum, and there were some pretty high-profile people there. I was at Parliament, and you made a statement about the Northwest Mineral Province, saying it was words to the effect of it's globally significant.
Yeah.
And I think that's important people for the rest of Australia to focus on, because you hear about the iron ore industry and the coal, which granted bring in a lot more royalties, but Tell me why you think it's so significant, the Northwest Mineral Province, and nationally and maybe even globally.
Yep. So I think one of the things to be said is we are getting to understand more and more why these giant ore bodies are there. And if you look at a line that takes you from MacArthur River in the Northern Territory, through Century, through the Mount Isa field, Ernest Henry, and actually as far down as Olympic Dam, they are actually all related. So they're all related to kind of the big scale.
The Olympic Dam, right down there in South Australia.
Absolutely. So they're all there for a reason, and the reason is a global scale bit of geological architecture, if you like. So they're all basically on the margins of very ancient rocks that have been there for billions of years. It's quite unusual. And during those billions of years, copper, lead, and zinc particularly has been essentially mobilized, removed from those vast ancient rocks and deposited into these deposits along the margins. And let's not dive into sort of too much geology, but there's a reason why they're all there. And if you look at these sort of structures worldwide, I'll tell you what, that sort of geological environment in Queensland lights up the map globally, absolutely lights up the map as to the kind of sheer endowment of giant copper and lead zinc ore bodies and how well they line up against the big sort of structures that we're talking about. So they're there for a reason. And then the other thing, and this is to me a really simple proposition. If you look at the Mount Isa region, one of the great mining regions of the world, more or less every ore body that's been discovered there has been on outcrop, where the rocks that carry the minerals are sticking out on the surface, but 70 to 80% of the entire region is undercover, and which means there's the soils and sands have been covering the old rocks, and there's essentially almost no discovery undercover so far, and everyone's hooked onto this, and particularly the big companies. They all recognise these big ore bodies are going to continue undercover, and what we've got to do is work at how to be really good at exploration undercover. And there's a heap of work being done there. So look, if enough work's done and the technology serves us well, there will be more giant discoveries undercover of the size of Century or even Mount Isa. There's almost no doubt about it. Now, what does that mean? It means obviously the industry's got to have the technology and the commitment to do this. And, I think it means government's got to continue to be supportive. There's many other sort of reasons why it's a good region to explore. And if you want to make a difference to the Queensland economy, discover a couple more Centuries or even Mount Isas.
One thing that stands out in what you've said, and what previously as well, what you've said is that it's there's an enormous potential in terms of volume and quantity of what you've got there, but it's also the diversity, isn't it?
It is.
The fact that it's sort of you're not homogeneous, sort of like the Pilbara or the Bowen Basin or Galilee. We're talking about all types of minerals. So if one collapses in the world market, you still got your zinc and
Well, look,
using
I'd also
zinc
argue,
and
if
uranium, whatever else is
if
there.
you're getting very interested in green metals, and it's clearly a popular idea right now that we get into new economy metals,
Yeah,
then you can't go past copper, number one.
yeah,
If we're going to be in an electrifying world, the new economy mineral that's the most important is copper.
right.
And that's quite handy because copper is actually relatively easy to mine and relatively easy to produce an end product, and
Yeah,
Queensland's got plenty of it.
and we're very good at it. There's been some world-leading technology at Mount Isa, hasn't there, in the past?
Absolutely. So look, not only we got the ore potential, you've got a smelter, you've got a refinery, and you've got the port, all the
Yep.
infrastructure you need to be in business.
Well, look, I might just jump in there and say something a bit political, but the fact that they've still remained open, some of those copper mines, in what would have been some of the world's highest industrial energy prices over the last years since the rollout of the LNG plants in Gladstone, I think speaks volumes of how competitive we are in mining, and how resilient that Northwest Mineral Province. Because certainly Glencore was saying that was the highest energy prices by a country mile of their entire global footprint that they were
So
paying in Mount Isa.
yeah,
So,
yeah. So we did a bit of work now, probably 4 or 5 years ago, looking at the future projects in the Northwest Minerals Province and talking to all the players and saying what are the constraints on you developing these things, and certainly up there in the top three would be power prices.
yeah,
And again, there's kind of an opportunity and a challenge here. So we do have a gas pipeline. That's good.
yeah,
You know, you can easily add gas generating capacity at Mount Isa. Just add more gas, generators. But the gas prices are high, and that's only part of the problem. There's also no gas available. So even if you wanted to buy gas to turn it into electricity, it's very hard to find any gas that's not committed
yeah,
in
yeah,
Australia.
yeah,
So that's something that really needs attention, and
yeah,
and it's certainly a big constraint if you're paying super high power prices.
yeah. Yeah, well, I would argue that LNG plants being built created certainly for the Northwest, created a lot more problems than benefits than they created with
Yeah,
sending that gas overseas.
it's something that needs to be cracked because there's gas in the ground in Australia, of
Mm,
course,
yeah,
but it's sort of two things there. It's actually make it available, so it's
yeah,
actually got to be opened up, and then getting the market right so that the price is competitive.
yeah, yeah. So, but that I suspect you've had something to do with this number, but I've heard the number thrown around before of, they say, well, is Mount Isa in the Northwest, is it sort of coming to its end of life, which you've already suggested is a ridiculous statement to make. There's a lot of minerals in the ground,
Yeah.
but I've heard a figure thrown around of $740 billion worth of metals that we know of in the Northwest Mineral Province.
Yeah, I think that's. Look, I can't pick that number, but it's in that order of magnitude for sure. Look, one of the things I've pointed out a few times is the biggest base metal ore body in the Northwest Mineral Province is the lead zinc ore bodies at Mount Isa, and from recollection, that's got over $100 billion worth of metal in the ground alone, one ore body. The second biggest base metal ore body that we know of in the Northwest Minerals Province is the Mount Isa tailings dam.
Wow.
That's got
Yep,
40
and
billion
and
dollars worth of metal.
Century's now made a complete new mining project out of just mining an old tailings dam. A
Yeah,
new
yeah,
Century mine.
that's
So,
a really interesting. Look, the Mount Isa tailings are difficult. I mean, I'm not suggesting it's ready to be dug up, but New Century showing what you can do, in terms of recovering. So hundreds of millions for sure, and there's future discovery that's potentially going to double the amount of metals that's available.
yep. So the point I want to keep coming back to is just talking to the average bloke in the street, and they want to know that there's a future of industry out there, and that because I think there's probably in that embedded view that that's a depleting resource and that it's coming to its end. But really, we've got some enormous opportunities out there. But as you outlined, those usually need a bit of a catalyst. So you had that catalyst in the 90s with the Carpentaria gas pipeline. that enabled 5 mines. And the point I made then was that, most of that benefit goes through to Brisbane and flows through to Brisbane, Townsville, the likes, where sure, we get a few jobs out in the region, but it's really more statewide benefit. But those things don't always just happen. They need a bit of a catalyst. And, one of the big things we're behind at the moment is copper string. It's one of those enabling assets that can help diversify those options for energy out there and lower the price of energy for the mines. And if we do those things well, there's a huge future, and perhaps a much bigger future for mining of metals in the Northwest Mineral Province. Does that
Absolutely.
sound
Yeah,
about
yeah.
right?
No, I mean, that's it's look, the copper string's got the potential to half the power price. That's pretty amazing. But it's not just that. It's if you wanted to go down the gas route, you'll be paying more, but there's probably no gas available. Actually finding gas that you can actually buy is almost
Yeah,
impossible.
yeah.
So copper string solves both the problem, availability and price. Yeah. And look, I mean, my take on it is uh, if there was an area that you wanted to put some focus on to build the Queensland economy, the metalliferous opportunities in northwest Queensland is got to be right, top priority.
Yep, and there's no politics associated with like there is in coal or perhaps iron ore with the environmental movements and whatnot that sort of hate anything to do with mining. They seem to leave us alone a bit more in the Northwest Mineral Province.
Yeah, look, there's some interesting things in Queensland that we shouldn't forget. We've got a giant coal industry, and it's obviously a very difficult issue politically. That you've got to decide what your view is about the coal industry, but we shouldn't forget it's our biggest export by a long way, and it produces a hell of a lot of revenue.
Pays for a lot of schools and hospitals. Yeah.
Yeah, it does. And in a way, the way it's being played politically, I think, is that rather than coming out with an explicit sort of statement about what we want to do with the coal industry, what we're saying is we've got all these mining skills, let's apply them to new economy minerals, and
Yep.
so that's kind of okay.
Yep.
I do think we need to be not too entranced by really exotic metals and minerals.
Okay.
That's just my view. That there's a
Yep.
bit of a sort of bandwagon here that what we ought to be doing is produce lithium, cobalt, vanadium, graphite, all that lot. That's all good, but they're not going to make $1 billion investments come along.
Yep.
But copper and lead and zinc will.
Okay,
And
that's interesting because I mean mining's always going to attract people on the fringes as well, trying to sell the next big thing. And
yep,
a lot of in my short experience, there's been a fair few false starts where there's a lot of
yep.
promises made. You think this is going to be big where it doesn't. But
So you've got to
the message
separate
I'm
sort
getting
of
from
stock
you
market
there's
hype from reality a bit,
yeah,
and the
yeah,
last couple of years it's been really easy to go and paint a great story about the kind of cobalt mine you're going to build or the whatever,
Yep.
the rare earths mine.
Yep.
Those are quite difficult things, whereas actually mining lead, zinc, silver, gold, copper, we're right on top of the technology. You can produce saleable products easily. There's not many technical hurdles. We're actually well endowed in those minerals. And to me, it's important to get the policy right for those sort of developments.
Sure. And John, just to probably backtrack a little bit, we should have explored this a little bit at the start. But you have, just to qualify these sort of statements you're making, like you've got a pretty good optics on global mineral opportunities and mining opportunities, and from that position you've got now,
Yep.
it gives you good visibility on where the opportunities are globally.
It
So
does.
you can speak with some authority.
Yeah. Well, certainly our business here in Brisbane core, more than 50% of our clients are international. So we're working on projects all over the world.
Yes, yeah, but so I'm not saying, but you mentioned that function that we're like globally significant, if not the most globally significant opportunity for a minerals province.
So I think there's a couple of other things to remember here. Australia is actually politically stable and supportive of mining.
I try and make it a bit more unstable politically, but
Well, you know what I
despite my
mean.
best efforts.
I'm comparing us, let's say, against sort of, the DRC or,
Yep.
Bolivia or somewhere. We
Yeah.
are politically stable.
Yep.
We are, we have infrastructure. You actually have infrastructure.
Yep.
You have fairly mining friendly communities.
Yep.
And I think that's probably fair to say in the Northwest, the communities
Oh
are
yeah, my
for
God.
mining because that's
Yep.
where the jobs are.
Yep.
You don't have a lot of land use competition really. So, so you're not competing against a whole country packed with towns and villages and
Yep.
whatever. You've actually got sort of a bit of space.
Yep.
And look, we're also, I think, we are very, very good now at managing the environment.
Yep.
I mean, there's a lot.
Oh my word. I mean,
There's a lot of knowledge about how to manage a mining
Yep.
project in an environmentally sensible way.
Yep. And there's been a lot of money spent to correct some of the, I'm sure there's still some damage done out there, and of course you're going to impact in mining, but I've seen a lot of money spent fixing some wrongs of the past too in mining.
Yeah, yeah.
in my
Oh, look,
time as well.
most of the messes are actually mining from the past.
Mm.
So, look, they have an impact on the landscape, of course.
Yep.
You've got to make decisions about where your priorities lie, but
Yep.
you can certainly manage them to a very high standard.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing you say about the, the people on side, because I think the mining industry, it's something they really need to deal with is, I think that's run hand in hand with the fact that people got locals saw jobs at the mines, and as the percentage of local content has declined, so George Fisher was in Cloncurry used to always proudly declare it was sort of 30%, and they're a good local, they really make the effort. They're a good employer. I think it's down to 23% now, and I
Ernest
couldn't even
Henry,
tell
you
you.
probably mean, yeah.
Sorry, Ernest Henry, not George Fisher. But as that number declines, I think in the long term you're going to have more and more. You're not going to have that local support as like you have had in mining, and I should say we collectively, because I think that's a challenge for the industry. But I just make that as a comment, really. Because people will defend mining to the hilt in Mount Isa and Cloncurry, but I just think that's a bit of a threat going forward, is to keep people with you as
I
they
agree.
progress.
Oh, I do agree. Yeah. Look, there's obviously a lot more than direct jobs. So there's all the purchasing and indirect jobs and so on. And I think mining industry's got to stand up and make sure it supports communities for sure.
Yeah.
Not be remote as well. When we built Ernest Henry, we spent a lot of time getting to know the community.
Oh yeah.
And actually
It's done a good job.
connecting with the community was a pretty important thing. So they knew
Yep.
who we were and what we were doing.
Yep. No, it was set up well, and it's been maintained well in that respect, John. I'd have to say. So yeah, I mean, I guess it's just really good to hear this, because it's very difficult for me, and I don't have the legitimacy to sort of say it publicly, that mining in this state and in this country, it's not all iron ore and coal, despite that, they're the big income earners for us, but there's some huge things for us to do, but we need to make sure that the government's doing its bit to make sure it progresses with things like copper string, which will be the new, same as the gas pipeline, so that, in another 30 years' time, 20 years' time, where someone else is having this conversation with the likes of you that's involved in mining, and this new, hopefully, wave that we're moving into of, and I guess for me it's a bit of messaging as well, that you would forgive people in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne to think that all these country towns and mining towns are dying and there's no future in it, but there's actually a fantastic future in the Northwest Mineral Province and the cities associated with it and towns, because there's a lot there from what you're telling me.
Absolutely.
So, mate, what's what are the next big ones coming in the Northwest? Do you think it's going to be copper or zinc or nickel, or just whatever project?
Look, I think things are probably quite an interesting state at the moment, Robbie. So in the last year, we have seen a couple of really interesting discoveries, and that's good. So probably most people would say, what happened to the discoveries after 1995? There was this huge burst of development back then, all based off discoveries, and there's been a bit of a gap, and a lot of that was to do with getting to understand how we explore undercover. And so I'm just seeing a number of interesting discoveries being made in the last year. Good old-fashioned exploration and geology.
Yeah.
You know, I think that'll kick things along. You know, people start to see serious discoveries can be made
Yeah.
in what's an old region.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe there's been a bit of perception that exploration's hard, but you know, there's a couple of good discoveries coming through.
But you guys can do your job, and you'll do a fantastic job at exploring it and drilling it and finding the investors and putting the project together. But then if you want to get that operational phase and you start talking about the rail providers, and Queensland Rail says we need an 8-year take or pay contract, which means you pay for it whether you're operating or not, which I think happened to Dougal River out there for about 3 or 4 years. They were paying for rail they weren't even using. But that's all they'll give you is a long-term contract, and then the power operators say, well, you need a gas contract, and we haven't got any gas to give you at the moment. Then you've got to sign up for 5 years at this world high prices, and then you're trying to look at the roads. We've got to upgrade all the roads because it's now you can't use the rail. It's not available. They're all the things we're supposed to help you guys with to make sure. So I think a lot of people listening think, well, how come it's not happening? You know, if there's all this minerals and there's all this opportunity, there's a lot of work for us to do in government and not spend, in my view, not spend money on extra football stadiums in Brisbane, but get this stuff right so that,
So we did a
pathway.
we did a phase of work. You know, one of the jobs that we did in the region on behalf of the government was talk to all the owners of mineral properties and said, what are the things that you need to see to help you get the next generation of projects along?
Yeah.
And you more or less hit the list there. So it was getting more. It was well, but I'll add a couple. It was cost-effective power, probably number one. The condition of the roads.
Yep.
Particularly, things are off the main highways. So access to rail without having to buy a take-or-pay contract.
Yep.
And actually, look, honestly, there's some fixes there because there's people sitting on take-or-pay contracts that they're not using.
I understand that. Yep.
So why can't you trade your take-or-pay capacity to someone else? That would be very simple fix.
Yep.
Facilitation from government.
Yep.
That's getting permits and permissions together. I think government, recognises this and recognises that getting facilitation and permits issued is an important thing. There is, and I'm speaking from my industry sort of discussions, there's a belief that there's a fair bit of tension within the system at the moment.
Yeah.
You've got the Department of Resources that is very keenly trying to promote mining, and the Department of Environment's mandate is to slap as strict environmental conditions as possible on all projects.
Yeah.
And they're both doing their job.
I wouldn't take too much convincing of that, John.
Yeah, but they've both been told to do their job, and their job's important. But it needs a bit of coordination. Yeah. Because we've got a number of small companies trying to work their way into mineral projects. For example, trying to rehabilitate old mine sites, and they're finding kind of on day one they're being assessed, an environmental bonding requirement that's beyond their capacity.
Yeah.
So there's some sort of coordination. It's got to be made a policy, a priority of government, which means getting departments all to work together on this.
Yes.
I'm not saying they're not doing their jobs. It's just the jobs are put in tension with each other a bit, the way it's set up at the moment.
I often find a lot of that tension you refer to is, my observation is just everyone, and particularly governments and department heads, they're so risk averse, they just want no risk associated with environment, which is just impossible. I mean, if you're going to be mining, you're going to have an impact. And it's not to say we don't make every effort to do it as best we can, but you're going to have an impact. Anything we do in life is going to have an impact, and it's going to have risk, and you're never going to mitigate all that. And I think it's just this, this insatiable appetite that governments have to de-risk everything completely, which is, it's just not reality, and it's equates to nothing happening, which is sort of where we face.
Right. Yeah, that is a risk. That's right. So if we value the opportunity, which I think we should, like the opportunity is, this is an area where you could get serious new investment that would make a difference to the entire state.
Yeah.
And you've got to make some decisions about how much risk you accept in making it all happen.
Yep. When are you going to get back on that rail? Because, it's one of those big enablers, and And I've said to some mining companies before, some of the more prominent ones, like, would there be 1 million tonnes that's on the road now and trucks that could be on the rail? And no one's ever questioned. They said, usually it's, there'd be, at least that, or I'm sure there'd be more than that. So I haven't got firm figures on that, but I mean, 1 million tonnes that's a lot of capacity, and no question there's more trucks on the road now on that highway carting ore than there are trains, and the train volume's down.
Look, you wouldn't be far off that number. I can't tell you what it is, but it would be many hundreds of thousands of tonnes being trucked down the road, which is dangerous and expensive.
But it's really immoral in a way, because we built that train line, which is purpose built to cart bulk ore, and as far as I'm aware, it's still the most efficient and environmentally friendly way to cart bulk ore.
Absolutely.
From the mine to the port.
And it's actually a carbon friendly way of doing it. If
it is the carbon friendly way, precisely. I mean, that was always the argument for the copper smelter was, it'll be 4 times the bulk carted to China and smelted in China in much less environmentally friendly conditions, presumably, than so measure the carbon footprint of that.
As of 4 years ago, we're a bit out of date here, and I don't know what's happened since then. The easiest fix on getting more capacity in the railway line is let people sell their take-or-pay commitments to third parties.
Well, I wanted to ask you about this because, as I understand, one of the main users said to me a number of years ago, one of the prominent main users said there's 2 conditions under the Queensland Competition Authority guidelines that Queensland Rail have to operate on, and that's 2 conditions that stood out was, 1, they can't do discounts on backload. So if you're carting a heap of stuff on a train out to Mount Isa, you can't get a discount on bringing those same carriages that would otherwise be carried back for free. You can't get a discount on trying to get something to make it more profitable for you on the load back. And the other was that every new contract must be higher than the last, which goes against normal market principles of bulk supply, like economies of scale. You can't say, well, I'll put 500,000 tonnes back on the rail if you give me $1 discount on the track fee, which I've had confirmed by Treasury and Queensland Rail before, and I think, crikey, can we fix that? Yeah, and I think the solutions there would be perhaps even cost neutral to the taxpayer, if not, could be more, because you can get bulk ore back on the rail. They don't. A lot of them don't have to pay for the road use, and they do have to pay on the rail, so taxpayers make more. So there's.
I don't think anyone can commercially negotiate with Queensland Rail to change some of those fundamentals. So if you're a customer trying to negotiate a rail freight contract, and I've done it there. You can't negotiate. So if you're going to fix it, it's going to have to be done by the owners, which is the government.
Well, I've certainly had a few meetings with treasurers and transport ministers on the issue, and I haven't got anywhere. So perhaps that reflects more poorly on me, John, that we haven't got anywhere with that.
It's a topic worth pursuing, though, I'm sure.
Yeah. Actually, another comment you made on the roads earlier, I know with Incitec Pivot, they had a royalties to regions program. When I first got elected to Parliament, and there's sort of something that mimics that as well with the Labor government now. But I used to laugh at it because you'd see a school or a roads funded in Townsville, or these areas are well away from the main mining areas. But there's 11 kilometres of the road down the phosphate road from Cloncurry, so that they had no all-weather road or bitumen seal to one of the world's biggest fertiliser. One of the biggest fertiliser plants in the Southern Hemisphere. And we only needed 11 k's of bitumen to make sure they could get trucks in and out during wet season. And we never got the money to start. I think the feds finally coughed up the money, and that'll be sealed in the next year or two. But I've been in Parliament over 10 years now, trying to get that 11 kilometres of bitumen sealed to a massive mine that provides so many jobs. And that's the struggle you have. That 11 kilometres of road, that's
So everyone south of Mount Isa, actually the first thing they always say is fix the roads, because they have to drive them every day.
So I take your point well there. I'm well aware of that. So John, I really appreciate you coming on today, and it's good to have someone of your calibre that has so much respect and background in the industry to to just let us know that there's a big future, and despite whatever they do to coal or iron ore, we've still got a massive future of mining in this state, and we can still be global leaders in it.
Absolutely. Quite agree.
Thanks for your time, mate.
No worries. Nice to chat.
All the best.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye now.